On this episode of Turning Point Tactics, I'm going to talk about the balanced data slate, the overall opinion of the balanced data slate itself, what changes have been made specifically, and go through those changes, give a bit of my opinion on them, and then finish up with a sort of overall discussion of the meta at the moment, what I think about it, and what you can do as a competitive player planning for a tournament that's coming up in the future. So let's get straight into it. Hello and welcome to Turning Point Tactics, the competitive Kill Team 40k podcast and YouTube channel focused on giving you the strategies and tactics to seize initiative every turning point. I'm your host Ryan, and I'm here to give you the tips and tricks to elevate every part of your Kill Team experience. If you enjoy this content and you want more, you can join our Patreon for as little as £3 a month. We'll get access to our Discord, patron priority questions, early access to videos including Kill Team bat reps, faction guides, and much more. If that's not for you, you can support just by hitting like, subscribe, and sharing these videos amongst the community of Kill Team enthusiasts local to you. With all that said, let's get into it. Okay, so unless you've been sleeping under a rock, you would have seen that the Warhammer community team have released the balanced data slate from the competitive team for Kill Team, and it's all available both on the app for you to download or on the Warhammer community website. If you go to the download section, you can see all the changes there. So first things first, it's quite a significant amount of changes. They've changed loads of different teams, they've changed different rules, interactions, all sorts. So there's probably, if you're playing Kill Team, the rules for your team have changed in some way, or they've issued a clarification to make sure that you understand how your rules should be playing, all right? So definitely worth checking out the website or updating your app, whatever's easiest for you. I'm personally an app man, but for a lot of people that are out there, they are people that like to have the actual cards, and maybe you bought the cards from GW ahead of it, and you're now annoyed because the rules have changed. Well, a change that I think is really good is that what they've done is when they've released these new rules, if they've changed the rules that are on your card or the data cards that you would have for the pack, they've actually, in the balanced data set downloads, also updated the cards. So you can now go on the download section and you can download new cards with all your rules and the changes that are on there, and they're all in the correct format and that sort of thing. So I think that's a really nice change. So you can get your tarot cards and do it, and if you haven't bought the cards already, well, actually you could take those to a nice printer, cut them out, get a decent card, and you can get it in a different way and potentially save yourself some money on there as well. So I think that's a really nice positive change. This is, I think, very much in line with GW's trying to keep the rules free and not disadvantaging people who have gone out of their way to buy the data cards and then see that it's all their rules have changed. So unlike a Codex in 40k, which ends up covered in pens, pen marks and all that, we're not in that situation yet for ourselves. So that's the first change, and I do really like it. Okay, let's talk about overall sort of feelings for the balanced data slate. So they've gone through a lot of changes, all right? So they've basically gone through, almost every team has received some kind of change or clarification to their rules. There's been a lot of rule clarifications, mainly to do with timings of actions and that sort of stuff. I think broadly all the changes are positive, and I don't think there's any that I'm thinking are particularly out there and crazy, but I will say that I don't necessarily think it's going to address some of the bigger problems in the meta, but that's mostly because of the way that some of the new teams rules work and interactions with those rules and how that interacts with how other teams work from a core perspective. The majority of the changes have actually been focused rather on nerfs. There has been a few nerfs, but mainly on buffs actually, which I quite like. There's quite a few teams out there that needed probably a bit of help, and it's nice to see that GW have given them that, because otherwise for a long time teams like Kasrkin have been broadly not unplayable, but struggling against most of the teams that are out there, and they've now got a few little abilities that are going to help them out and perform a little bit better. Although what I will caveat that with is, I think again, because this is the way the new teams interact in the meta, we're probably going to see those teams still continue to struggle, because I don't necessarily think that they've solved the core problem sets that have come out with this release and what teams like Felgore and Goremongers do to the meta per se. But for the majority of players, I think the game is more balanced for the majority of teams. All right, so there's clearly some teams that are not balanced, and everyone sort of knows that. I think that's not I think that's a particularly outrageous statement to make. You probably know what those teams are, or you have opinions of those teams, all right? And I personally think the last box set is probably the most problematic for people in the short term. But for the majority of teams, I think you'll be in a better place. So if you play Vespid, if you play Aquilons, if you play Kasrkin, and you're playing against other teams that were a similar sort of power level to you, you're going to have probably more fun and have closer games as a result. Whereas before, some of the more problematic interactions have sort of gone away. So I think it's a better set of changes that's going to help the game overall. So that's the overall feelings, and we're going to get into the actual changes now. So I'll talk through what they are. So there's a cool core rule change that really only affects Angels of Death that I can think of. If you can think of a use case where it affects something else, then I'd be really interested. But essentially, it is to do with counteracting, doing double actions within a counteract, so Wrath of Vengeance, and being able to get around the heavy rule. So it's just clarifying that you can't do two actions during a counteract, one of them being a movement, such as a fallback or a reposition, but you can only move 2 inches anyway, and get around the heavy rule, right? So the only time I can think of this that comes up, and I'm be interested to know if someone can think of another use case, but it's Angels of Death using Wrath of Vengeance and the mobile faction trait to do a fallback during a counteract, and then using any of their heavy weapons or heavy profiles, so the sniper, the heavy bolter, or the stalker bolt rifles, and then getting a benefit for only having done technically a dash, because the way the heavy was worded is it's during an activation, and specifically a counteract is not an activation, and therefore you could potentially get around it because you've not used the weapon in an activation per se. That is the only use case I can think of how it changes. So it's I would call it a nerf to Angels of Death, but I don't think many people would have been playing it that way anyway. It's more just a rules clarification. So I'm sure someone out there was, and for that person it probably is a nerf, but I personally haven't been playing it in that way, so I don't think it's going to impact much for Angels of Death. Outside of that, Angels of Death, nil changes. So next up on the list though is Blades of Khaine. They got a clarification ruling for their Fading Light, and you'll see this for quite a few of the similar things. So it's a firefight ploy that they have that lets them, during that activation, perform a fallback action for 1 AP less. And then now it just states that you can do that before or after an action. So you can do it, you can fight, then fall back for 1, or you could fall back for 1 and then shoot or whatever, right? So it just gives you that clarity that you can use it in either of those ways going forwards, which is good. That's it for Blades of Khaine, just some clarification rulings. So for Blooded though, they've got some more clarification rulings. So the majority of these are to do with timing again. So there was like a debate of when do you remove a model, where do you measure a model from, all that sort of stuff. So for Bitter Demise and for Explosive Demise, and this is when they die, they can deal out damage on their Grenadier or any of their models with Strategic Ploy. It just says that before you move from the kill zone, do that damage so you can measure correctly from those models, which is all good. And the other one, which is a common theme across the board, is Dark Favor. This is their like get down, Mr. President. Basically take a shooting attack, push it on someone else, and take that person to take damage instead. Well, this just says that if you do shoot them and the original target is out of cover or not obscured, that subsequent target will also be not in cover and not obscured. So it just says you're basically just transferring the attack straight over, which is good because you could theoretically force an attack over such that it became way weaker, and I think that's a bit too strong as a rule set goes. So just gets rid of those, which is nice. Okay, so we're into Brood Brothers. They had changed to their pervasive strategic ploy. So this implies that you can only use it for climb up only. So technically you could climb down stuff to get around essentially paying for movement costs and getting around the drop costs potentially in certain areas. This just kind of just closes off that thing. You can only ever do it if you're going up rather than if you're climbing down, which does mean in some instances you can climb down, I guess, for some teams in future, which might become a thing. Unquestioning Loyalty had a change, exactly the same as Dark Favor. That's their get down Mr. President equivalent. So no cover or obscurity if the original target isn't in cover or obscured, which is good. The Psychic Familiar had a clarification ruling just to say that it's when they're on conceal only, they get the small rule, which makes perfect sense, rather than being on engage and trying to be super concealed on engage, something like that would be crazy. And then finally, some clarity on the medic rule as per usual. So it works in the same way. It doesn't work against blast attacks and all that sort of stuff, and you can't dive subsequently from the same attack, if that makes sense. So those are the changes for Brew Brothers. Into Chaos Cult, they have had a change where the Torments can't use weapons that aren't on their data card. So specifically what this means is they can't use crack grenades and they can't use frag grenades. So for those who weren't aware how this interaction would go through, Torments could have a free fight ploy. So they would charge you, they'd fight you, and if they couldn't get the double charge off because you had spaced your models correctly, so you were outside of the range for them to be able to fit a 40mm base and charge both of you, then what they would do is they would use the ability to then throw a crack grenade potentially and pick up a double kill, right? So that was the idea of it. Didn't come up too often, to be honest, but when it does come up, it comes up. And now they can't do that, right? So that's kind of it is a nerf because their Torments aren't going to be able to get those easier double kills, and the Torments really are the most killy things on the list. So for them, that's the bit that's going to be a little bit harder for them to do. But note that still Mutants can and Cultists can. So I still think you'll see Chaos Cult players rocking crack grenades. They're still pretty effective for what they want them to do. But you probably won't just see any, well, you won't see any Torments going for double kills. So more important, continue to maintain your spacing to get around the Torments, double charging and getting a double kill with their Torments. Okay, we're into Corsairs then. So Corsairs did get quite a few nerfs. And I think, to be fair, this is somewhat justified. Like, a lot of these, I would say, were very hard to play around for some teams. So I'll talk through them and then sort of talk through what the changes are, and it will probably make a bit more sense. So firstly, they had a timing change. So Capricious Flight is the same thing. So it's before or after it performs an action. So it just gives you the ability to do it as and when required for their Firefight ploy. But then we're into the Kernite Hunter, and the Kernite Hunter is the one with a bird, for those that don't know. The way it used to previously work is if it had its Falchu, and it hadn't used it in a range attack, which it very rarely would, it would be able to fight first in defense, essentially. So now the operative has to be ready, and it's regardless of if they've used the Falchu or not. So hopefully we'll see more people using the Falchu to be an aggressive attack weapon, but also it will mean that they have to hold off using that Kernite Hunter and not just be able to move them up, wait and be able to fight first if you're a melee team. So the ability for elves to counter some of those melee teams is a bit harder, but note, you can still be ready and do it. So it's probably better into that cross turning points rather than in a single turning point activation. The next thing that they've done is do some nerfs for the Shade Runner. For those of you who have played against a Shade Runner on Into the Dark, you know how problematic the Shade Runner can be. So the first thing they've done is the Warp Jump can't be done in combination with a dash. So for those that didn't know, that the Warp Jump allows them to go essentially through terrain, they can do it pretty much anywhere. And it used to mean that they could dash, then Warp Jump 7 inches, and just get some crazy angles that you weren't necessarily expecting. Now they can't do that. So they have to either choose to dash and then run normally, or Warp Jump and go further, which I think is broadly a good change. There should be some negative to just being able to do that Warp Jump, but it keeps a lot of its core mechanics of being able to do what it wants to do. The other change that they've done is the slicing attack rule. So you have to be able to be visible at the start of the action to deal damage to an operative that you then go through and do. And again, this is the whole, as I said, like scenario where you're trying to like hide behind a wall, you move out really quickly, you do damage, you come back, and no one can interact with you, right? So now you have to be a little bit visible, which probably means you're a bit more exposed potentially, and you're not going to be getting free damage, which is again, it's a little bit of a nerf, but if I'm honest, from someone playing against Corsairs, these two nerfs I don't think are the most impactful out of what this team has been nerfed with. So I think the Kernite Hunter's nerf is pretty significant because that guy can be a bit of a menace if he's on an objective and you're a melee team. You sort of have to go and shoot them. These Shade Runner ones I don't think are too much of a change. The bigger one that I think is probably the biggest nerf for this team, but and again I'll leave other people in the comments if you think I'm wrong, let me know. But it's this nerf. So they've changed the way the Wayseeker's warding shield works, right? So the warding shield was a psychic action that the Wayseeker can do, and essentially it became just a scratch, which includes normal and critical hits on a single target, right? So they've now changed it So it's only normal, not critical, right? So that was really, really impactful, because sometimes you have someone that's like quite weak, say they're on whatever it is, a couple of wounds remaining, and you just go, right, I want to go and kill them. And let's say it's the Kernite Hunter, right? And now they're given a Warden Shield. Well, they're going to strike you first and do 4 or 6 damage. Say you then go to hit them. The Warding Shield absorbs the damage, whatever you roll, and they then strike you back, and they can then potentially kill you. So they could potentially do anywhere between 8 to 12 damage, and you can't necessarily interact with it. So that's a really strong ability. But now you actually have the chance to roll a crit, or if you use like a severe weapon, you're able to get it through, and it won't necessarily be able to avoid that damage, which is really, really impactful. So I think that's quite a significant change, because for lots of teams that are sort of crit-based teams, so your Hand of the Archon, for the Hearthkyn Jaegers, for any power weapon teams, all that sort of stuff, right? All those teams are going to find this way, way better to be able to force through damage against these guys. So that, I think, is actually one of the most impactful nerfs. I think, I might be wrong, but I think that might tip Corsairs over the edge a little bit, and might make them, in comparison to the other Elven teams, a lot weaker. And I think Void Dancers are probably on top now. I might be wrong, but that's kind of where I'm at on that one. So quite a lot of nerfs for Corsairs, which is interesting to see. Next up, we have Death Korps of Krieg. The Death Korps, they have a change their strategic ploy, clear the line. So Death Korps models can essentially get accurate 1, and if you're fighting wholly within your territory, or whenever it's retaliating, its melee weapons have the severe weapon rule. So I think the only way that I'm going to describe this as a change is it's clearly a buff, right? And the bit that I think is most important is when you're retaliating, you get accurate 1 and severe. So the reason that's important is if you're like a average melee team and you're not particularly good, what you could potentially happen is you roll your dice and you get a crit and a hit. So you only got 1 crit, 1 hit, and then you go to fight against Death Korps model, and if they have accurate 1, they get, let's say, 2 hits. Well, everyone knows that you need to be able to resolve these, but a normal can't block a critical. So what you'd do is you'd use your normal hit to hit first. You would take some damage, you would then try them with a crit, and you would kill, right? Whereas now, that is never going to be possible, because they're always going to be retaining 1, and that is always going to end up being a crit. So I think that's really impactful for how a lot of the teams are going to play against the Death Korps, right? Because for the grand majority of people, like, it's just a slight reduction in the likelihood of you killing them in your charge. So that's pretty good in my opinion. It also means that if you're on their territory and they're fighting, and you're a 7 wound team and they're using hand axes, something like that, they have a slightly increased chance to kill you in their own side of the board as well. And it does help them versus teams like Felgore, where they can basically just charge in and go, I'm going to hit you with a crit, and there's nothing you can do about it, you're dead. So that's overall quite a good buff to Death Korps. My concern though is that they don't have particularly punchy melee generally. Like this is a buff to their melee, and they will be better at it, but I'm worried that for a lot of the teams that are going to be coming at them with the ability to reduce damage and ignore ranged damage to a certain extent, they're going to probably just chew through them anyway. So it's good, but it probably won't help them necessarily too much, in my opinion. Okay, looking at Starstriders then, so they've just basically clarified 2 of the rules. There's various ways that you could get ceaseless in Starstriders. So the Elucidian Vein had the merciless rule, and all they've done is clarify that when the ceaseless becomes, so you have balance normally, when it becomes ceaseless, you don't get to have both balance and ceaseless, you're getting just ceaseless. So it's kind of a clarification, which is a potential nerf if you're reading it previously that you could get both, but I personally thought it was clear that you only got 1 before. So hasn't changed much, I don't think, but just clarifies what happens. The other one is a disciplinarian rule with the Voidmaster, but it's the same. Okay, looking into Exaction Squad then, so they have their execution order, where they've just added the clarification that in either case, next time your opponent would activate that enemy operative, you get to go first. So you can't like GA2 to get around it, or do something to be able to avoid them not being able to go with their execution order, they're always going to get to do it. The other clarification they made with Exaction Squad is for the Veriscan action. Essentially on weapons like the Weber, which has Severe built in, it says if you have Severe, it gains lethal 5, and they're just saying that it's also lethal 5, not instead of Severe. So if you don't roll any crits, you would still get your Severe. You don't lose it because you gain lethal 5. So you get both, which is kind of cool. Okay, into Farstalker Kinband. So they had their Firefight Poise slip away. This is exactly the same clarification when it comes to timing. So it becomes before or after it performs an action, you can use Deploy, which is just a common theme of just sorting out some of the timings and sequences in the game. All right, Felgore Ravagers. So again, this team actually did catch some nerfs, which I'm not too surprised about, if I'm entirely honest. I think they had a very strong performance, and they were one of the more problematic and strong teams to have to contend with. So the first change is to Frenzy. So what they've added is the sort of when Frenzy applies is when its activation ends or counteraction ends. So this means that you can't charge someone, die in outside your activation, whatever, and then counteract, fight for free, not die because you're not frenzied or not. It's not your activation, and then do something else or shoot someone or whatever, right? So it means that if you use it, you're still going to die, and it means you're either getting an activation or a counteraction, and that's it, which is good because these guys don't need more actions before they die, because they are very hard to kill. Next, they've changed Ambush, which is one of their strategic ploys, and they've changed it to read instead: whenever a friendly Felgore Ravager operative that is ambushing is fighting, you can retain one of your fails as a normal success, so discarding it, or you can retain one of your normal successes as a critical success instead. So they've gotten rid of the ability to retain a normal success instead, and you can only do the criticals. So that's quite a significant change, in my opinion. What it means broadly is like when they're doing it, because a lot of them are in that 4 attacks, they need to basically get 3 attacks to kill most things, and they'll be able to go, cool, I only got 2 hits, but I can make it 3, I'm guaranteed to kill you whatever you roll. Well, now actually they're not going to be able to do that. There is still some of their operatives where it won't change too much. So they have one of the guys that can double resolve, which usually procs off a crit, so he's still going to love this, but it just means it's slightly less reliable for their melee charges for ambush, which is, again, a significant nerf in my opinion, particularly for a team that doesn't have a lot of attacks on their attack dice, because it means that they're more likely to whiff when they go in, and that can be quite significant when it comes to a lot of the melee combats. They've also changed Reckless Determination, and this is a big impact to their durability. So for those who didn't know, Reckless Determination is their ability to retain essentially an auto-retain for their armor saves, and they could previously do it with a cover save, and now they have to choose if they want to essentially get one or the other. So they're always going to be retaining 1 rather than retaining 2. There was like weird ways where if you were shooting them on advantage and they're on conceal and they had this, they could be retaining 3 dice, which is just a lot of dice to retain, right? So now, maximum, they're going to be doing either cover or they're going to be doing Reckless Determinations. They'll be getting 1 or potentially 2 from advantage, whatever, but they're not be getting 3, and they won't be routinely be getting 2, which is quite a big change to their range durability, right? So that's a straight up nerf. I think that was pretty impactful because it comes up pretty much every single time you play Felgore. Unless you're a very strong melee team, you don't want to be getting into combat with a full strength guys, so you want to chip them down a little bit first, and this means that they're more likely to go out on the way. Next, Nulscar and Mangler operatives, wound stat change to 10. So this is really significant because 10 is a very, very common breakpoint in this game. And the ones that come to mind is your power weapons are 4/6 lethal 5, so that's probably going to mean that you can now 2 hit them as long as you get the crit. There is a lot of base 5 damage weapon games, so like power fists and that sort of thing, which will again mean that you're more likely to 2 hit these guys. And then there's also things like 4/5 rending, which you can get on quite a few people. So that kind of profile again means that suddenly your 2 crits will actually be more likely to kill. So that change from 11 to 10 is actually very significant, and it will make them feel that they die significantly easier, albeit that they frenzy first and then come back, obviously. But just for awareness, that's kind of where they're at. So that's a another hit to their durability, which is going to be impactful. And finally, you have a change to the Shaman's weapon. He's gone to Seek Light versus Seek. Generally across the board, I'm a fan of this. I don't particularly like in the game infinite range Seek weapons, because it's you can't play around it. His damage profile is a bit weird anyway, so it wasn't necessarily he was going to kill something, but it could just sometimes spike and do way more damage than you're expecting. But now that that's gone, I think you'll see that in just Seek Light, you'll see him be really impactful on ITD and that sort of thing, because the majority of terrain in that environment where you care about it on the objectives is light terrain, but you won't see these long range shots across the map potentially for this full Seek, which is, in my opinion, a good change. Where does this put Felgore overall, though? Well, so sadly, I think they've hit Felgore pretty hard, and Felgore's competition at the moment, in my eyes, is Goremongers and Chaos Cults as the sort of main melee teams, in my opinion. And I think now it's going to be close, but I think they are definitely behind Goremongers and behind Chaos Cults. And so I think relatively they're going to struggle more into the meta than those teams will, because as I said, the changes to their those wound stats, the changes to the retains, means that, like, if you're trying to take them down with bolters, you're more likely to do the chip damage you need to kill them. They're more likely to whiff on their own charges with the changes to ambush, and I think they're going to get bullied a little bit by those stronger melee teams that haven't necessarily been hit. So overall, I think this is a pretty significant set of nerfs to Felgore. I won't pretend that I'm sad to see it. Like, I find Felgore quite a problematic team in the way in which they interact with the rules of the game, and it's basically based on frenzy. So seeing that them getting toned down a little bit is for me, like, I think a good change, but I know there's a bunch of Felgore players out there that are going to feel probably quite upset about it. What I would say is you could look towards Goremongers, or you could look towards Chaos Cults as alternatives that are probably going to be stronger in the upcoming meta, in my opinion. But let's move on. So Gellarpox Infected. So a team that's now got quite a few buffs in comparison to the nerfs of Felgore. So the first thing that they've got is a clarification when it comes to mutoid vermin, which is just that essentially they're ignored for victory conditions and scoring VP completely. So just the mutoid vermin stuff, they're not a VP scorer for you, so don't worry about it. It just clarifies how that works. They've also also changed drawn to the hum. So you now, with the drawn to the hum, you must end that move within 2 inches of that objective marker. So you've got to try and get towards objective markers, and that's a balance change, obviously, for that. I'm going to roll into some of the other changes, which I think are the most impactful. I don't think those two change anything, but I think these do, these next two. So first, let's talk about Blessings of Infection. So whenever a friendly Gellarpox Infected operative is fighting or retaliating, you can do one of the following. If you roll 3 or more fails, you can discard one of them to retain another as a normal success instead. If you roll 3 or more successes, you can discard one of your fails and retain one of your normal successes as a critical success instead. I think this is going to make them way more reliable in getting melee kills, which is kind of what you want, right? So either that means that you can, if you're rolling well, get a crit and doing better, or it means that and probably where you're going to use it more likely is you get your 2 hits, but you miss with 3 of your attacks. Actually, I'm now going to change that so that I get my 3rd hit and go with that. Or if the damage breakpoint needs that crit to be able to get through, you can then make sure you get a crit if you're rolling well and get 3 successes. So I think that's a big reliability buff. Like, pretty much everything in melee comes down to 2 hitting people, and that comes down to, can you get 3 hits? So if you have a way to be able to, like, via this Blessings of Infection, or the alternatives of things like Purity Seals and that kind of thing that other factions have, anything that can force that reliability up is really, really impactful when it comes to melee teams. So I think this is a significant buff to them, although I think they're still going to have an issue of being able to actually use the range to get into melee in the first place, but that's a separate conversation. Next is the faction equipment Mutoid Vermin. So After revealing this equipment option, add 4 Gellarpox Infected mutant operatives to your kill team. In the battle, you can set this option up to twice battle. So you remove the second part, so you now just get 4 infected vermin operatives. So that's really good because it means that essentially you're now getting an extra equipment point, and that for almost like every single team, an extra equipment point is very good. So yeah, just straight up, it's a buff because you don't have to use as much equipment options to be able to get the full roster of your team, because you're probably pretty much, as far as I'm aware, always going to take the full amount of vermin. So yeah, that's a straight up buff in my opinion. Overall, I think this is a good change for the team. I mean, there's some really cool things I think you can do now with, like, so for instance with Volgar, being able to almost guarantee a crit if you get 3 hits is really nice, because he has things like rending he can put on his weapons, and being able to just add that like ability is really strong. And then equally you have that whiff protection, because if you roll 3 misses and you're like, oh, I've only got 2 hits, well actually you can solve it and you can quite reliably kill your sort of 8 wound models without too much hassle. So I think there's some significant buffs to Gellarpox. My concern with the team is I still think they're going to be pretty slow, and they might not have the range to be able to get the charge that they want, particularly if you have an opponent that has lots of terrain blocking features or something like that, or uses their equipment terrain in good ways to try and cut off various charge routes against you. I might be wrong, but that's kind of where I feel that they're going to be. Okay, next we're into Goremongers. So they've made a clarification, that is it, they haven't nerfed this team. So the clarification is on the Stalker operative for this climbing picks, and it's basically the same thing of whenever this operative is climbing up, you can treat the vertical distance rather than climbing down. So they've just made sure that it's only when you're going up, you can't climb down to avoid paying any additional movement tax. So I think Goremongers are going to be in a pretty strong position. And I'll talk about that at the end as to what it means for the overall meta, I think. Okay, Hand of the Archon, they got some more changes. They got some nerfs, really. So this is sort of on the theme that elves have sort of taken a bit of a hit. So the first one is the stimulated senses. You can reroll one of your dice rather than ceaseless. It's a straight up nerf, and will be probably quite impactful for a lot of their models, because if you needed it and you needed to have that reliability, like it's a straight nerf, right? Like there's not much to talk about on that one. Next thing they have is just a timing change, just so people are aware, which is the Cruel Deception. So it's a before or after it performs an action for the Cruel Deception firefight ploy, to just adding that caveat of when these things happen. And finally, the nerf that has come through, which is the Sky Splinter Assassin's Razor Wing weapon. They've changed the attack stat to 4 rather than 5. So for those who don't know, this is one of those long range seek weapons, and it's just again reducing the effectiveness of long range seek. So I think it can max out now if you did get 4 crits to 8 damage, but seems quite unlikely. Whereas before, it could potentially go up to 10, and with 5 dice, you're more likely to chip damage through. So I think that's a good change. Again, just generically, I'm not a fan of long range seek being particularly effective, so I'm happy to see that get a hit. I haven't played enough against them to know if the rest of it is justified. I'm going to assume that it is, and that taking stimulated senses down to balance rather than, it's not balanced, you can balance and the reroll, sorry, but getting rid of ceaseless is fair or not, but I think it might not be, but that might just be me. Okay, next, Hearthkyn Salvagers. So the jump pack war operative move stat has changed 7 inches. It was previously 8. For those who don't know, a lot of Hearthkyn players basically predicated themselves on doing an alpha strike on turn 1, because the jump pack warrior had such a long movement range that you could charge really quite ridiculous ranges, or you could move, dash, throw a crack grenade, or do something like that, right? So now that range is just slightly reduced, and by it being just slightly less, it means that there is a little bit more of your table edge that makes it safe. Playing around it was really difficult to do, and you had to like constantly think about where this guy could end up, what he could shoot, and how likely it would be that he would kill that model. And it was, I think, probably not fun to play against for a lot of opponents, because it was just like, if it's something you can't really interact with, and it's like you out-activate me, and at the end of this turn, this guy's going to yeet himself across the board and throw a crack grenade in my face, or he's going to potentially, even worse, charge someone, fight them, kill them, and then throw a crack grenade at someone else with Ancestors watching. That's even worse again. So my opinion is that it's probably good that that's a little bit less common. I think 7 inches is fine. Probably could have gone down to 6 maybe. He's still pretty fast. The other one, which again, I always joked about this equipment, because I used to describe it as, whenever you're playing against Hearthkyn Salvagers, they just have initiative on turning point 2, and you just have to play around that. So you always went into Hearthkyn with the assumption that they would be having initiative on turning point 2. And yeah, okay, so I'll explain how they've changed it. Writ of Claim, their faction equipment. Now it's once per battle. If a friendly Hearthkyn Salvage operatives contest 2 or more objective markers after rolling off to assign initiative, you can use rule. If you do, you can reroll your dice, right? So if it comes initiative reroll, it used to be able to add flat values to your result. And so kind of like the sequence of events would be, if you were out activated by Hearthkyn, is you would get the last activation would be a jump pack warrior charging, fighting, and throwing a crack grenade at someone else, potentially getting a double kill. They would then use Writ of Claim to pretty much guarantee initiative on the next turning point, and the Hearthkyn warrior could do the whole thing. So the jump pack warrior can do the whole thing again, and potentially get another 2 kills, or focus a lot of damage into a single elite model or something like that. So personally, those 2 abilities combined, of like the very ridiculously long-ranged double kill and then having this Writ of Claim, I think was a bit too strong. But I'm interested to see, because I haven't seen Hearthkyn players generically I've seen some players do really well with them, but generically doing really well. So I'll be interested to see how the faction performs post this, and if they need to like buff other parts of the faction to make it better, or if they're actually going to be just fine. So it's like they've taken a tool out of the Hearthkyn's like box, and I'll be interested to see, is that going to mean that they just like drop off on win rates, or are they going to be carrying on as they are? But there's probably a grudge in there somewhere against someone. Okay, next we're talking about Hernkyn Jaegers, or Hernkyn Jaegers, sorry, not Hernkyn. A few changes here. These are now on the opposite side of it. These are buffs, I would say. Well, they are buffs, not really too much around that. So the first one is Strategy Poise Masterful Blade Work. So whenever an operative is fighting or has a conceal order and is retaliating, add 1 to the attack stat of its melee weapons to a maximum of 4. This is really useful for the Plasma Knives, because they will probably take Plasma Knives every single game, and there are 3 attacks. So now suddenly you're going up to 4 attacks unless you're in an engage order and been charged by someone. And you get the balance rule with that weapon. So that's pretty good, because what it broadly means is you're rolling 5 attack dice, and that means that you're more likely to be able to get a crit, or 2 crits, or whatever it is you need to be able to do the damage that you need to be able to kill people, which is really useful. Additionally, if you already have balanced, you're going to gain Ceaseless, which comes onto the other part of the faction equipment, which is if you already have this weapon. So if you're a warrior and you already have a plasma knife, in that instance you gain Balanced, and therefore if you use this ploy you'll be getting Ceaseless as well. So it would make them better. But I think pretty much the fact that you're going to have like a base 4 attacks weapon with Balanced, to me means that you would just be running shotgun Jaegers for your warriors, and then get that plasma knife for free, because the shotgun is so much more impactful and so much better than the pistol alternative for the team, in my opinion. There's also changed the Firefight Poise Stalwart Defense. So it used to be that you got -1 to hit when you were doing it. So if you had like a rocket launcher that hit on 4s, you'd now be hitting on 5s and that kind of thing. Whereas now you don't worsen the hit stats. So your sniper will be hitting on 2s, your shotguns will be hitting on 3s, and all that sort of good stuff. So this is actually, I think, really strong for a lot of the Hearthkyn players, because it means that whenever you charge one and they have the opportunity to provide that like Overwatch as you go in, they're going to do a lot of damage to you as you go in. And I think they'll need this in the current meta. So I think like Jaegers are going to probably have like a weird way of playing, where they're going to have a bunch of guys that are out sort of front with their plasma knives ready to sort of be on conceal and tank stuff, and then a bunch of shooty guys behind ready to then shoot you as you come in. Because if you're a, let's say, Felgore player, or you're a Goremonger player, like sure, you're a Goremonger, you only take 8 damage, or you might get frenzied if you're a Felgore player, but actually then you're now in combat with a guy with a plasma knife who can do 3-5 damage, and it's balanced, and he's got 4 attacks. Like, he's probably quite likely to get a crit, so you can then force it just over the edge and potentially get those kills where you weren't necessarily expecting. So this is, I think, a nice set of changes for the Short Kings overall. So there we go. Next, we're into Hierotek Circle, which has received a nerf, I think, in a sense. I'm pretty sure it's either a clarification or a nerf, but either way, it's the same outcome. So the Technomancer has the augment weapon action, where essentially you can give like a few different benefits to a weapon. I think it's like severe, it's rending, it's lethal 5, are the ones that come to mind, or unsaturate, I think, are the options. So on some of their data cards, their range weapon has the same name as their sort of melee weapon. So it'll say Staff of Light, range, Staff of Light, melee. And people can then say, well, actually, I've made the Staff of Light better, and I've given it these 2 rules, therefore now both the range and the melee get the benefit. Well, actually, you can't do it anymore. You have to choose either ranged or melee, which makes the Technomancer not quite as good, or just clarifies it. So yeah, I think that's kind of where it's at with it. I don't know if that's something they could change in future to buff the team if they needed it, but I think Hierotek are in a good place. Okay, into Hunter Clade. I'm trying to go through these like quickly because there's so many changes. Hunter Clade, the leader options, so that's the Rustalker Princeps, Infiltrator Princeps, Ranger Alpha, and Vanguard Alpha, gain the Control Protocol additional rule. The Control Protocol additional rule means you can use the command Override Firefight Ploy for 0 CP if the specified Hunter Clade operative is visible to this operative. And that command Override Firefight Ploy is you can use this Firefight Ploy when a friendly Hunter Clade operative is activated. Select a Doctrine imperative for that operative to have instead of the current one, if any, until they're ready to have the next strategy phase. So it just gives you a bit more flexibility. So you can potentially be running your ceaseless shooting, and then you go, actually what I want is that Rustalker to now get the melee buff or the additional movement buff, whatever, and then away they go, and off they get some kills, and it's going to save them having to spend that money on the CP, so long as they're visible to your leader. So it is a nice buff for Hunter Clade there. They keep getting buffs, and we'll see how they perform going forwards, but I guess they need it. Okay, next we're talking about Imperial Navy Breaches and the Firefight Ploy Deckhand. So essentially what they've done is add the ability to ignore accessible terrain to that ploy, and you can perform a free Operate Hatch action during its activation. So this kind of like this buffs them on open board because you can go through accessible terrain and get some additional distance, which is quite nice. But also it buffs them on ITD even further because now you can essentially open the hatch for free, move without that 1-inch move penalty, and go do the stuff that you want to do. So quite a strong buff to Imperial Navy Breaches, who are starting to do a little bit better from what we've seen in the local meta. Additionally, they've just clarified on the expendable rule for the Cat unit in Geist Skull that it is ignored victory conditions and scoring VP, so you can't kill it and get VP from Seek and Destroy attack or something like that. All right, next we're into Inquisitorial Agents. Same clarification as for the Cat unit in Geist Skull, but now for the Tomb Skull operative. So exactly the same thing. You don't score for VP from it because it's expendable going forwards. Okay, we're into Kasrkin, and Kasrkin have a lot of changes. And what I'll do is I'll just start with explaining what scanned is, because a lot of the other changes are going to relate to being scanned. So the Recon Trooper is becoming like more and more integral to how this team operates, and his Auspex scan action is now until the start of his next action, or until it's next activation, or until it's incapacitated, whichever comes first. Whenever an enemy operative is in with 8 of this operative, that enemy operative is being scanned, and essentially it's can't be obscured. So 8-inch bubble around this guy. When you're within 8 inches, you're scanned, you're not obscured, and a whole bunch of rules are going to trigger off being scanned. So the Recon Trooper is going to become really important to be able to get some of your other rules to trigger. So Firstly, faction rules, skill at arms. So light 'em up is where you get severe on your shooting weapons, and now it's got three options. Either you're shooting someone that is ready, not in cover, or being scanned. So you can chuck your recon trooper in the middle of the board, huge 8-inch bubble, and then if anyone's in range of him, then they're going to be scanned, and you'll be able to use your severe weapons for light 'em up. Additionally, they've changed Ice in the Veins. So the first time an attack dice inflicts normal damage of 3 or more during that sequence, you get -1 damage. So you can make your guys a bit more durable, essentially. So you're just reducing how much damage that you can take. And for the Forcadia option, whenever a friendly Khazan operative is fighting, the first time you strike in that sequence inflicts 1 additional damage. So if you're going in with your melee knives, you might be able to just punch through a little bit more. That being said, I don't think that any of them are particularly good in melee, so therefore I don't think it's going to make much difference when it comes to what you can and can't kill a lot of the time. I might be wrong on that. There might be a few niche cases, but Kasrkin are struggling to kill stuff in melee, so that's not going to change. So the strategic ploy clearance sweep has changed. So now you're going to get ceaseless when you're in range of that token, which is a nice buff, I guess. So you're going to get a bit more reliability when you're shooting. Although hitting on 3s, you're probably quite likely to get most of your hits anyway. But it's nice to see that's an option. Next, you have the elimination pattern. So if you're shooting against an operative that is not in cover or is being scanned, that's the new addition, you get the piercing crits 1 weapon rule. So you're just adding that ability to essentially have a big 8-inch bubble, or 8-inch either side of a model, and then potentially get piercing crits 1, which is a nice buff. Neutralize target, which is a firefight ploy. So the caveats now are you're shooting at an enemy operative that's expended, or not in cover, or being scanned, so it adds that another option. You can get your rerolls, so a good way of being able to get some additional rerolls where needed. So they changed some of the faction equipment as well. So the long range scope, so whenever you're shooting an operative more than 6 inches from it, you're going to get the saturate weapon rule. It's easy for me to say. So again, that's just going to help you basically put through a bit more damage towards stuff that you need to be able to try and kill. I think this will be useful against sort of your more hardy teams, because generally you're either going to be shooting from across the map where this is going to come up, or you're going to get within 2 inches and shoot them in the face, and therefore you've got a good option to be able to get around those cover saves. And the ones that you care about probably on your hotshot las guns are sort of the 7 wound operatives or less, because you then get severe and you're getting saturate. You're probably going to kill a 7 wound operative unless they have damage mitigation, which some teams do. Then for the sergeant, the tactical command action is changed so that you can select 1 friendly Kasrkin operative, and that they gain 2 skill at arms essentially rather than just the 1, and they have it until they're ready for the next strategy phase. And it can be in addition, right? So you can essentially say, right, I want this guy to get +1 move and the severe shooting, or the better melee and the damage reduction, whatever it's going to be. So it's a good way of being able to get around that, and you will have to think about how you plan it, because you're going to lose one of them. But you can probably think about, all right, I want this guy to be able to later on increase move or have that severe, so I'm going to go team-wide damage reduction on turn 1, but I'm going to have the option to give him this benefit, or I know they're going to come at me, therefore I'm going to give him benefit straight away, and then have the other one ready to go. So a little bit to think about with that, but overall a nice change. Do I think this is going to help Kasrkin out of the hole that they're in? I think the answer is no, and the reason why I think the answer is no is because not because of like Kasrkin in a bubble on its own, but because of what surrounds Kasrkin, right? So Kasrkin are essentially like a 1 action damage team. So they go, I will move up and I will shoot you and I'll do damage. And I have a whole bunch of ways of doing that. I'm either going to use melt gun, I'm going to use a plasma gun, I'm going to use a grenade launcher, whatever it's going to be. But they're not very good at doing like in a single action multiple damage where they can. So like the sergeant could charge, fight, and then shoot someone with his 3 APL, but like no one else is going to reliably kill something unless it's very weak. So teams like Goremongers, I think, are the absolute counter to teams like Kasrkin, and whilst they exist in the meta, I can't see Kasrkin doing well, because unless you go to a tournament and you just don't play that team, then you're unlikely to win, because as soon as you come in contact with this team and Goremongers and Kasrkin play, I think Goremongers pretty much always win. They are faster than Kasrkin. They are sort of killier than Kasrkin. They're very good at doing the right amount of damage to kill Kasrkin. And Kasrkin cannot kill them in single activations, and potentially with the healing abilities as well. I think Goremongers are likely to kill Kasrkin and not realise that they've even taken damage, if that makes sense. So I'm pretty sure that Kasrkin won't do well in the current meta because of that matchup. It's the same can kind of be said with Felgore. They operate in a very similar way, and yeah, I just can't see them getting around those problems. So in my opinion, I think Kasrkin need a way to double kill against hordes more reliably, and do a bit more punch damage in melee. I would like to see like a firefight ploy to use your shooting weapons in melee, like a sort of like pay a CP. You can then shoot in combat, so your melter becomes, whether it is 6-7 damage, and you ignore devastating, whatever. The plasma gun becomes 4-5 or 5-6, whatever, and you can basically run up and shoot in the face. Because then you could potentially charge fight with that and then shoot someone else, and you can get a double kill, and it lets you kill some of these harder to kill monsters such as Goremongers and that kind of thing. But until those sorts of things change, I can't see this team doing too well, unfortunately. Although against a lot of the other field, like the non-problematic teams, they've probably got a chance, but they'll do better than before. But they're still going to, I think, be capped by what's holding them back at the top. All right, let's move on. Let's talk about Kommandos. They've just changed the bomb squeak expendable rule. So this is again the clarification, just to say you can't score VP off of expendable, and the various ways that means you can't score VP from it. Next, we're into Nemesis Claw. So the Return to Darkness strategic ploy has been changed so that you measure through walls when you're doing your measurement towards close enemies. This stops, like on ITD, you're essentially running 6 inches towards your opponents, because you couldn't measure to them on turn 1. It means that the horrible alpha strikes that you could potentially get are now not possible, which is a nice change, because there were some very mean people doing some very mean alpha strikes on people in ITD. So that's now gone. Okay, Novitiates. So again, just some clarifications for Novitiates. So the Glorious Martyrdom, this is when they do damage before they or when they die. It means that they've just clarified the timing, that they do it before you remove them from the kill zone. And then the medic rule, exactly the same as how all the other medic rules have been ruled. So that's good. We're just getting some clarifications and making sure that everything is aligned between the various teams. Next, Pathfinders. So Pathfinders have had some quite significant changes, and I think it's going to help them out a lot. Although again, similar to the Kasrkin story, I don't think it's necessarily going to change the key part that is going to be the problem set for them. So firstly, the way Markalites work. So for those who didn't know, it was essentially you would get Saturate, and you would get Balance, and then you would ignore Obscurity, and then you would get Seek Light. They've changed that now. So now it works where on the first Markalite token that you get on someone, you get Saturate and Balance. That's really, really good, particularly on the fact that a lot of the weapons are hitting on 4s. So a nice buff. But if you get 2 Markalite tokens on an enemy, you can then improve the hit stat for any weapons by 1 to a maximum of 3. So your Marksman, your Shaz-Wee, and the Blooded are still only hitting on 3s. But what it means is that generically the majority of your team can suddenly massively increase their reliability, because just by getting 2 Markalites, you're balanced, you saturate, and you're hitting on 3+, which is really, really good for a shooting team. So that's going to massively help them out. So I think that's a good change for Pathfinders, and it's going to make them way more competitive against a lot of the field. Another thing they've changed is the point blank fusillade, which is a firefight ploy that they have. And they've added the bit to it at the end, which is if that friendly operative is ready, has an engage order, and is retaliating with a pulse weapon, you resolve that attack first instead of the attacker. So essentially, this is if you charge me and I'm ready and have an engage order, I get to shoot you as you're coming in, and when we're fighting, I'm going to be hitting you with 4-5 damage. If you have 2 mark lights on you, I'm going to be hitting you on 3s. It's going to be balanced. It means that there's a good chance I'll be able to potentially kill you, but there's a bunch of caveats to get you to that point, right? So you have to be ready, you have to have an engage order, you have to have a pulse weapon to be able to strike first, and noting that, again, teams like Goremongers, they're going to halve the damage on the first hit that they take, probably. So you could be hitting them for 4 damage, they're going to halve it down to 2, you hit them again, and then you're dead. Or they're going to parry you out, or whatever. So this is a good change, and it will help you against some of the melee teams, but I don't think it's going to save Pathfinders from the majority of problematic teams that are out there right now. So again, similar position to Kasrkin. I think this team's going to feel much better and in a much better place than they were previously, but I still think there are some teams that when you come up against them, you're going to go, I don't have the answer to this team, and it feels very much like this team just beats me straight up. Whereas against, say, like elites, I think they're going to do really well. Okay, so into Phobos, just a few clarifications. The Reaver Sergeant and Reaver Warriors, they're grab, shoot, and grapple launchers. Again, they've just changed it, so it's a climbing rule, only works when you're climbing up. And the Helix Adept Operative Medic rule has been changed, so it works the same way as everyone else's. So for Medic and the climbing rules, that's just been aligned across everyone. No other changes for Phobos. The Plague Marines, they have changed the strategic cloud of flies, and they just reduced the range of it, so it's only now within 1 inch of that marker rather than within, I think it was 3 inches previously. It was huge. Irrespective, I think it's a good change. Like, cloud of flies, I still think is good. The fact that in the strategic phase you can say, actually, I need essentially a pseudo smoke grenade, and I'm going to put it here when I need it, is really strong. But what you're not going to be able to do now is hide multiple operatives within inside a cloud of flies. You're going to probably get one operative, or if it's spaced very, very close together, you might just be able to squeeze 2, but probably just 1, which is, I think, a good change. Other than that, the rest of the team has been untouched. So I think Plague Marines will continue to be strong in the meta. Ratlings have received a nerf, so the bomber operative, I have stories about the bomber operative, which I'll tell on another time. But anyway, he also brings tripwires because he's amazing. So when you're setting up equipment before the battle, you can set up 2 of the tripwires, holding their territory, and they now have to be 2 inches away from other markers, access points, and accessible terrain. So previously, what you could do is you could place them in certain ways. That meant that if you tried to move through the accessible terrain, you'd trip the wire, you'd go back to the other side of the accessible terrain, and you wouldn't be able to necessarily get out, particularly for your 2 APL team. But now it just means actually you are going to be able to get out. I still think you can play these pretty smart. Like the main thing that a Ratling player wants to do is they want you to be able to only move onto one of these points, not to be able to dash. So you have to do your move or your charge. You can't dash and reach the point, because if you can dash to it, you can then just move off afterwards. So I think depending upon the map and where you can place it, Ratling can still use these, but it just means that they're slightly less oppressive than they used to be, where you could just stick them so that you couldn't get through doors, and that is frustrating to play against. Sanctifiers, these guys did actually get a nerf, which is needed, but again, I don't think it's going to change too much in the grand scheme of things. But the main change that they have is, so the Confessor has to lead the procession rule. This is essentially where when they move, everyone in their sermon can also move with them as long as they stay in sermon. But they can't use this particular rule in the first turning point. So it's only from turning points 2, 3, and 4. What that means essentially is the alpha strike against you is way less in turning point 1. And I think why that's going to be impactful is because Sanctifiers could be so far up the board on turn 1 that also they could essentially have multiple alpha strikes on turn 2, see if they win initiative. If they do win initiative, they're going to then yeet those alpha strikes forwards, do damage. If they don't, they're going to then use a strategic ploy to bring those alpha strikes back so they're outside of your range, and therefore you can't necessarily get the kill, right? It's going to be harder for them to be that much further forwards, but they are still going to probably have those alpha strikes, so you still have to be ready for it. sorry, I say Alpha Strikes in Turning Point 2, they're still going to have those problems, but they're going to be a little bit further away, if that makes sense. So they're not going to be able to be threatening your back line unless they play very, very aggressively, and there's a chance then that you can then play around it. So I think this is a good change. I think it is needed. I think it's particularly for casual play and that sort of stuff. Just having a flamer be able to reach your deployment zone and flame your deployment zone isn't fun to play against. Like you shouldn't be able to do that. Like you shouldn't be able to get a multi-kill in your opponent's deployment zone on Turning Point 1 and not have your opponent be able to do anything about it, right? So that I think kind of sucks. I'm glad to see that's gone. This just means though that Turning Point 2, 3 and 4 are going to be more impactful, and actually it will probably mean that Sanctifiers play a bit more conservatively, which I think is going to be their strength anyway. So it will just force them to play a subtly different game, and they're going to be just as strong doing so. So I think Sanctifiers are still going to be up there. I don't think it's changed too much. It's just taken away the most egregious thing they could do, Turning Point 1. Okay, next we're into Scout Squad. So these guys have also got some changes. The main changes is their knives, all right? So previously the knives were 3/5, now they're all 4/5. If you take the faction equipment, you get 3 attacks at 4/5 for your scouts. Generically, that's really good because what it means is essentially you're going to have a shotgun, which is all going to be 4/4 damage, and then you're going to have knives and melee, which is 4/5 damage, which means you're going to be very, very good at killing 8 wound models. And even if your opponent decides to charge you, there's a chance that if they whiff, they're going to take significant damage and therefore die on their own charge. So for me, I think that's a strong buff to how scouts work. And I can't really see any reason why like you don't take shotguns and 4/5 knives on all your guys, right? Like the melee potential on your team is pretty significant by taking that. They also changed Emboldened Aspirant, which is their sort of like get good at killing a big guy or your first activation ploy. So they changed the last sentence to read, has a wounds stat higher than for any scout operative. You can change one of your retained normal successes to a critical success instead. Any rules that take effect as a result of retaining critical success, e.g. devastating, piercing and crit success still do. So essentially you just get a stronger either alpha strike or stronger trying to kill a particularly big model or anything like that. So it's a small buff to the Emboldened Aspirant. The main bit though I'm reading from Scout Squad is you're getting your knives at a 4/5 damage, and that means that you can reliably kill most 8 wound models in the game. And also if you can damage any sort of Goremonger operatives, they're more likely to be in a one-hit threshold damage range when they charge you, potentially. Because if you do 8 damage to them, you can potentially get them down to 2 wounds. They will heal before they charge you, and then you have a chance to try and hit them. With their halving damage though, it's still going to be problematic. I know. That's it for Scout Squad. Into Tempestus Aquilons. So first change, team selection, Servo Sentry moved to its own separate arrow bullet point. What that means is it used to be one of the ones you had to pick, now you get it for free. That means you go up to 11 operatives as an overall kill team, and that is a pretty significant buff to the kill team in my opinion. You're probably running recon most of the time with this kill team, and having an additional action monkey is really useful, and being able to additionally take more gunners is really useful for damage output. So they've also removed the caveat of gunner, marksman, and servo sentry, so you essentially can have your gunners, your marksman, and your servo sentry. Lots of high damage operatives going to go do kills, whilst your warriors and that sort of stuff can now do your actions, and you have more warriors to be able to do it. It also means that for your strategic ploy, you're going to get more rerolls because like the way you divide your team up into halves means that you now get more people because you have 11. And you're going to have more people in Deep Strike on Turning Point 2 because you can have 5 now in Deep Strike rather than 4 as it was previously. So some nice changes there and some straight buffs. That's not all though. They've also got a change to their hot drop ploy, where now you can use it if you're wholly within your opponent's territory, or you landed, or you dropped from advantage, all that sort of stuff. So another way to get rerolls. I see it as being quite good whenever you use it against like your melter gun against a big target and you've whiffed, and you're just like, sweet, reroll everything, away you go. It lets you be a bit more aggressive, get some good damage output and reliability in your damage output. Finally, the precursor gains ceaseless on their knives, which is nice. So one of the options got a little bit better in melee. They're going up to 11 activations, which is a nice change, and they got another access to rerolls. All of this really good changes for the team. Like, I've seen players do well with this team, but they've generally not been performing too great. But I personally think that going to 11 operatives is a really big buff that shouldn't necessarily be overlooked. Particularly when your operatives are 8 wounds base, you hit on 3s, you've got 4 up saves. Like, you're not bad operatives at all, and then you have more APL to be able to play with, more actions to be able to play with. It's a good change. I think they're going to really like that. It's going to really help them. Coming back to the classic rock paper scissors thing though, is that you don't have much melee on this team, and there are teams out there that if you can't do melee damage reliably, and you can only do 1 activation shooting damage, which is what this team can do, you're going to really struggle to play against them. So I'm looking at you, Goremongers. Like, I think Goremongers can potentially blend this team, and there's not too much that can be said about that. Cool. Next, another team that got a big glow up is Vespid Stingwings. So again, in team selection, third bullet point, so you can now go to 9 Vespid Stingwing operatives instead. So again, now you've got to 11 operatives, which is again really good for the team. Increase the APL to be able to do your recon options, which you need to be able to do, as well as potentially having that action advantage to do a last reaction. And really, that's where I see the strongest part change from this team, in my opinion, because I'm going to combine it with something else that's changed. So the Swarm Guard has a Sky Torch rule. Previously, you'd be able to move 6 inches and shoot anyone that you flew over with a flamer. Now it's now 8 inches, and that's a significantly different range, and you can potentially get a multi-kill. The reason why it's important is because if you're playing against a 10 operative team and you're going with this team now, because you out-activate them, your last move can be the Swarm Guard moving, and he can go pretty far, and then he can set up a potential sort of multi-kill. And if you're not ready for it, this guy is going to draw an 8-inch line across the board between wherever he ends on turning point 1 and wherever he ends on turning point 2, and shoot everything that's underneath him. And that can potentially kill quite a few stuff or hurt a lot of stuff, and just generally be quite mean. That I think could potentially win games really quickly and catch a lot of people out. So heads up, Swarm Guard, big buff. That 8 inches is going to significantly feel bigger. That's what I'm saying. 8 inches is going to be feel significantly bigger than 6 inches. You heard it here first on Turning Point Tactics, and therefore you should be ready for it. So that's the first sort of 2 changes. They've also changed the way the melee works. So the strategic ploy Sting is going to improve the hit attack of Vespid Stingwing operatives by 1, and they gain lethal 5 and shock. So again, you're going to get a little bit better when it comes to melee. You're more likely to be able to parry out or do damage to people on the charge, and just put through some more damage, which is nice. It's going to make them a little bit better against some of the weaker operatives that you can potentially pick off if they're low wounds. But broadly, I think this is still kind of a shooting team. To buff their shooting though, which is obviously what they need, the Oversight Drone operative has the aerial guidance action, which has changed. So now you just need to be within 6 inches of the operative that is shooting, and visible to the enemy operative. So you want to get your Oversight Drone in a position where you can see loads of stuff, be within 6 inches of all your buddies that want to shoot. You're then going to be getting lethal 5, and away you go. It's going to proc your devastating. You've got your rerolls from your communion points. Suddenly you're way more likely to be able to get some kills, which is pretty decent. So lethal 5 is a significant buff for this team to get. Cool. So I think those are some really big changes for Vespid. I think, again, I don't think that should be underestimated how significant that's going to be. They now have a bit of play. But before, I think they were always a little bit I mean, I think it's still a little bit two-dimensional. But now, like with the activation advantage, they're going to be able to get either their blast gunner in the right place for next turn, or the swarm guard in the right place for next turn, and then potentially you're opening yourselves up to more double kills that you weren't necessarily expecting. And there is a chance that if you're not ready for it, the swarm guard is going to catch you out. He's going to move and dash a long way, turning point 1, and then do an 8-inch flame attack, and can like if you stack a whole bunch of guys in a row, then you're going to get caught out horribly, because that flamer is potent when it hitting on 2s. Just as a heads up. Cool. Void Dancer Troop. So they have changed it such that you now only get it when you are fighting, not retaliating, for the epic Sadath, which is basically balanced, and you're not going to get it when you're retaliating. So broadly, I'm trying to think if this changes anything when it comes to the team. I guess it does a little bit. Having the rerolls in when you're retaliating is nice, but I think most of the time people are going to be using it when they're shooting, because that's probably where you need the rerolls more than the melee with your sort of 5 attacks. Might be wrong. I don't think this changes too much. It just makes Void Dancer Troop a little bit more swingy on their sort of retaliation melee, but when someone is charging you and fighting you, they usually die anyway, usually. So yeah, I don't think it changes too much personally. Onto Warp Coven though. So Warp Coven have a change to their Firefight Boy Capricious Plan. So for those who don't know, Capricious Plan used to let you dash and change your order, even if you'd already performed the dash before. So you could move, dash, do a shoot action, then suddenly change your order and dash away and be on conceal. Now you have to choose if you want to do the dash or change your order. You can't do both, which is quite a significant change in my opinion, because it just reduces your ability to like get the angle that you want to by standing out way in the open, shooting someone, but then dashing back into heavy cover and going on conceal, which then means you just don't get a shot at all. And bearing in mind, Warp Coven are usually out activated. It just stops you doing that during turning point 1 without being sort of like shot back or having some sort of counterplay to it. So I think that's a significant change, although Warp Coven have been hit a lot and they are still doing really well. So I think we'll still see Warp Coven performing pretty well as one of the better elite options that are in the mix. And finally, Wrecka Krew just got some clarification. The Bomb Octave, the expendable rule, same as all the other expendable rules in how it scores, and basically saying that you can't score at victory conditions, score MVP if you need to escape and survive, or be incapacitated by enemy operatives. So that's it. Those are all the changes. That's quite a lot of changes. It's taken me ages to go through them, but hopefully that I've covered them all. The bit that you're probably interested in though, and I think that this is the bit that I want to just talk about right now, is what this means for the meta. So having been looking at the sort of the kill team meta for a little while now, my opinion is that we have, when it comes to balance changes, we've entered what I would describe as like rock, paper, scissors balance. So and I'll use some examples. So if we say Felgore or Goremongers is one example, then we'll use elites as another example, and then we'll use sort of your elven teams, or probably a better example now is sort of like your shooty hordes. But your elites are really, really good at potentially killing and beating Felgore and Goremongers, right? So they have the damage output, the melee output, they can double shoot, all that sort of stuff. Whatever they need to be able to do, they can do it to kill those models. And they are very, very good at it. But what elites aren't very good at is taking damage from teams like Corsairs or the large shooty hordes that are now becoming getting more buffs, such as your sort of Pathfinders or something like that. But probably more likely looking at Void Dancers, looking at Corsairs and that kind of thing. So elites, very, very good against Goremongers, very, very bad against these other sort of teams like the Elven teams, and the Felgore and Goremongers are really, really good against your Elven teams, but bad against elites, right? So now you have the sort of thing of you turn up to a tournament, and if you happen to win that rock, paper, scissors sort of matching, you can potentially have a very, very easy run through where you have favourable games the whole way through, or now you can have very, very hard ones where you're not making the right matchups at all. And it feels like a lot of the teams are being balanced on that sort of principle. So if we say, well, Goremongers are okay because they can be beaten by Nemesis Claw, or they can be beaten by Legionaries or whatever, that's fine. But there's so many teams that can't beat them and can't interact with them. And, you know, I look at teams like Pathfinders, look at teams like Vetguard, I look at teams like Kasrkin, you know, and I think to myself, what does that team do? Like, what do those teams do when they come into that matchup? And I personally don't like the idea of just saying, well, you know, there's always going to be some matchups that you can't win or don't want to win. Like, I want to have more agency for the players. So personally, that's where I think we're at the moment. I might be wrong, and it might be that we are slowly changing away from it. And it is good to see that, like, Corsairs have received some nerfs, Felgore have received some nerfs. So I think maybe they're trying to break that rock paper scissors balance system. But it does feel that we're there a little bit. So I just want to quickly touch on Goremongers in particular, because I think, like, for me, it's a core rule that they have, that if it doesn't get removed, is always going to be a problem. So for Goremongers, the runes of Khorne, like, I understand what it is trying to do. It is trying to make them more durable against ranged attacks, and I think that's absolutely fine. Like, you could give them -1 damage against ranged attacks. You could give them a feel no pain. You could give them whatever you want, like you know, on a single dice roll against each of them. The way the new feel no pains work, not the way the old ones do. I don't really mind, but having a damage cap for me breaks a lot of teams. So, like, for Kasrkin, if you run up and you roll 4 crits against a Goremonger, and then they just go 8 damage, like, that just sucks, right? And you have to invest so much to get to the point where you can achieve that, that, like, you might have had to do an APL buff, you might have had to give them +1 range to their reposition with the Sergeant ability, and then even then, with all those stacks and buffs, you're only doing 8 damage, to which point they're just going to heal off the back of it, charge you, fight you, and kill you, and then heal again. Like, I can't see a way in which that matchup is ever favourable, or ever balanced for the shooting team. And I think rules like that, in my opinion, probably shouldn't be in Kill Team. I think damage caps as a thing probably shouldn't be in it. And I think Sanctifiers are another interesting example of just having slightly too much on the defensive abilities. You know, so they have, with their damage reduction, way more tank than you'd expect. So, you know, and it does often feel like we're balancing these two teams against each other, where they've given one team a crazy rule and it's fine because the other team has a crazy rule that gets around it, right? So generically, I think we're in a bit of a rock paper scissors meta, is my opinion. I think Sanctifiers are going to be really strong in this meta. I think Goremongers are going to be really strong in this meta. I think Elite's going to be really strong in this meta. And I think that's probably what we're going to see going forwards, with a few other additions. So I think Felgore remain good, but probably now Chaos Cults and Goremongers are going to take their place. I think teams like Inquisition, which are sort of a melee horde, able to do both, are probably still going to do decent as well. But generically, I think we're probably in, as I said, a bit of a rock paper scissors situation. But I might be wrong, and I'm happy to hear other people's thoughts on that. So my predictions for what's coming up, right, is I think Sanctifiers have been the big baddie at the moment, and I think they are hiding a problem, which is Goremongers, which we will probably see coming up soon. Goremongers are still figuring out ways to play their team better and what they can do, and I think Goremongers literally pose you a question as well at the start of the game, which is, can you do enough melee damage to kill me? And if the answer is no, then you're going to really struggle in this game. Or can you double shoot to get around my runes of Khorne, i.e. can you reliably do 6 damage twice in a single activation, because then you'll probably kill me. If you can't do those things, then you're like, I don't know what your game plan is against a lot of these people, apart from just sort of parrying out, which is kind of like what Angels of Death are doing at the moment, which is why they're kind of like a weird counter, because it's just like, I'm just going to parry you out and then hit you with enough damage that you probably don't want to fight me again. So they answer it with the, I can do enough melee damage, I perform well enough in melee to be able to kill you. So yeah, I think that's probably going to be a bit of an issue going forwards. And so what I think, if you're planning to go to a tournament, you need to have sort of an answer ready in the team that you're bringing for, if you care about winning. Like if you're going for that, I want to get podium and that sort of stuff, then how do I beat Sanctifiers? What are their main gotchas and their rules, and how do I do enough damage? Particularly look at the breakpoints when it comes to with like -1 damage on top of it. And I think it's always worth assuming that it's like I'm always -1 damage. What my breakpoints? They're going to have it in Sermon. Let's work with that as a baseline assumption. So Sanctifiers, you have to try and figure that out. For Goremongers, same thing. Can you parry out and survive and just tie them up, or can you double shoot them and do enough damage over sort of volume of fire? What's your like solution to those teams? And note just again how fast Goremongers can move. They have a really long sort of charge range. And then I would also be ready for elites as well. I think those are the teams that you're going to see at the top, is those sort of 3 teams. I think Sanctifiers will continue to win quite significantly. I think they'll be sort of split by elites and Goremongers, and the win percentage of Goremongers and elites is going to vary based on how many are sort of turning up, and that's, in my opinion, to that rock paper scissors scenario, because I think the last bit that's going to be playing a part of this sort of puzzle is the sort of shooting hordes that are going to be good into the elites, bad into the Goremongers, and Sanctifiers are probably your sort of jack of all trades at the moment, is how I'm kind of reading it. So I would try to figure out how your team, whatever it is you're playing, plays into those various things. And those are the teams that I'd be reading into to go, okay, like what rules do they have and how are they going to play, and how would I potentially use my rules to get around it, is where I think we're at. On just touching on Elven teams, I think Void Dancers are probably the best right now. I might be wrong. Corsairs are still really good. It's a tough one for me. I think Void Dancers are better, because I just think they have more of the abilities that are going to be more useful, more of a time into more opponents is probably how I describe it. Whereas I think Corsairs are a bit more of like a skew team, so I think they can do really well into certain matchups. Like a lot of the elite matchups, I think they're going to really dominate. Whereas I think they're probably going to struggle a little bit more than the Void Dancers will in some of those other matchups, like say versus Sanctifiers or something like that. Might be wrong, but that's just kind of how I feel looking at those teams. So yeah, those are the sort of the broad points for the meta. I hope I'm sort of wrong in this. Like I'm hoping that maybe we're not in a rock paper scissors balanced system. Like I personally would like people to turn up with any team and be able to do well, and not just look across the table and go, I brought the elite team and you brought the anti-elite team, or I brought the horde team, you brought the anti-horde team, or whatever it's going to be, right? And so that's the bit that I don't like personally, but maybe that's just me. What's your guys' thoughts on the meta? Do you think it was a good balanced data slate? I think overall, like I would just say, I do think that the balanced data slate was a good balanced data slate. I think it addressed a lot of what we wanted it to address. I think it's going to help a lot of those weaker teams. I think in a lot of places it's going to help flatten out those win percentages. But I think like in a few extreme cases, particularly the new teams that have come into the meta, I think they're still going to be dominant and they're still going to do really well. But what's your guys' opinion? What have I missed? Like, is there anything that you think is going to be a sort of dark horse out there that we're not tracking? They're actually doing really well, or do you think that it's actually a completely busted meta and there's no point in playing? Hopefully you don't think that, but that's kind of where we're at for this. What I will say, just as a sort of closing note, is Kill Team's getting massively popular. It seems every tournament I go to has more and more players and more people wanting to play, and every local club is talking about the fact they've had significant growth, which is awesome. And what we want to see is more people come into the competitive scene and more people playing at tournaments and that sort of stuff. And there's a whole bunch of tournaments that you can attend. You can check BCP, you can reach out on Discord and that sort of stuff and look for events. But I'll put a list of dates for the UK beneath this video of all the stuff that is available to take part in. And one of the things that I'm going to say is please do consider coming to the Turning Point Tactics event on the 21st and 22nd of June at Sanctuary Gaming Centre in Sutton, Ashfield, Nottinghamshire. We're hoping to have 96 players, 3 golden tickets available to win. Nottingham events have sort of been reviewed as being one of the most fun, sort of inclusive environments where everyone has a good laugh and it really enjoys the game. So we'd love to see more people there. It would love to sell out the entire store and keep supporting our local gaming store, keep themselves open. And we'd love to continue to grow that Kill Team community. So if you are available and you want to come along, please buy a ticket, come and see us. It would be awesome to have you there. If not, attend a local tournament near you. Put this this meta question into action, and actually let us know post this what you've experienced, not just what you thought to be the case. Because a lot of this is all ethereal. It's all thinking ahead, right? Whereas what's your actual experience been, and let us know what that experience is, and hopefully we can solve it from there. All right. Anyway, I'll sign off there. Have a great time. Enjoy your bank holiday weekend for those who are on it, and I will see you all next time. That brings us to the end of the episode. Hopefully you found something new or useful while listening, and if you did, throwing us a like would be greatly appreciated. If you want to make sure you don't miss any episodes, make sure you hit that subscribe button and click on the bell so you get notifications as soon as the next one drops. It really is the best way to help a small channel like ours. And if you can't wait and you do want early access, we have a Patreon where you can get exclusive access to all our content ahead of time. As always, we'd love to hear your thoughts and feedback. Just drop a comment below and we'll get right to you. Thank you so much for listening. I'm your host Ryan, this has been Turning Point Tactics, and we'll see you next week.